A few days ago, I came across a podcast where the host said something that really caught my attention. Malcolm Koonce doesn't look like the same football player anymore. That made me stop and think. Is his career really slipping away? Can he bounce back? Or are we watching his decline in real time? When I watched the Raiders' first preseason game against the Seahawks, I decided to study every single one of Koonce's snaps. He played around 15 or 16 of them, and honestly, he didn't look like the same guy. The burst wasn't there. The quickness felt off. The speed that once made him stand out just didn't pop off the screen. And it wasn't just me noticing it, others have been voicing the same concerns. In fact, Deshaun Reed from The Athletic even pointed out that the reason we're not hearing much about Koonce is simply because he's not making enough plays. But before we dive deeper into this latest story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss the latest updates. Now let's move on to the real news. Here's where things get interesting. When I went back and rewatched his snaps against the Seahawks, I also noticed that it wasn't just Koonce who looked slow. Guys like Max Crosby, Adam Butler, even Terry Wilson weren't firing off the line the way we usually expect. But then, just a few days later, when the Raiders played the 49ers, Koonce looked like a different player. Quicker, sharper, more explosive. He defended the run well, held his ground, and actually flashed the kind of talent that made fans excited about him in the first place. Still, the issue is consistency. Against San Francisco, he only played 11 snaps, and it's tough to judge a player's impact in such limited action. Unless you actually go back and study the film, it's easy to miss the little things he did right. And that's the problem. Most people only see what the broadcast shows, and that creates a narrative that might not always tell the full story. Here's something that often gets overlooked in football: the power of narratives. Take Tyree Wilson, for example. In that preseason game, he made one big play, and because the broadcast crew highlighted it, suddenly everyone started saying, "Wow, Tyree Wilson looks unstoppable." That single replay shaped the storyline. But here's the truth that many missed. Malcolm Koonce actually had just as many impact plays against the 49ers as Wilson did. The only difference? No spotlight, no highlight package, no narrative shift. Yet, if you study the film, you'll see it. Koonce pressured the quarterback several times. He battled against Spencer Burford, who, while filling in at left tackle, is still a legitimate starter-level guard for San Francisco, and held his own. Koonce stood him up, sealed the edge, and created lanes for his teammates to swarm the ball. Those are winning plays, even if they don't make the highlight reel. Now, is Koonce back to 100% of the player he was a couple of years ago? Probably not yet. I'd put him at about 90%. And that last 10% won't come from drills or film study, it'll come from real game reps. Taking 40 or 50 snaps in a night, getting cut blocked, bouncing back up, and facing the very next challenge without hesitation. That's how confidence returns. That's how a player proves to himself that he's truly back. And that's why I believe Koonce's story isn't finished. The way he uses his hands, the way he structures his pass rush plan, it's advanced, it's sharp, and it's hard to teach. Technique like that doesn't just vanish. Once the twitch and explosiveness fully return, we could see the Koonce from 2 years ago, maybe even better. One thing I've always respected about Malcolm Koonce is his technique. Speed and quickness matter, sure, but technique is what separates good players from great ones. And when it comes to bouncing back from injuries, we've seen plenty of examples in the NFL. Adrian Peterson tore his ACL and came back to dominate. Tom Brady suffered the same injury and still went on to build a Hall of Fame career. These guys proved that an ACL doesn't have to end your story, it's just another chapter. That's why I believe Koonce isn't far from being himself again. It's been over a year since his injury in training camp, which means not only has he recovered, but he's also had extra time to rebuild his strength and conditioning. Sometimes it just takes a few weeks of real football, live snaps, real hits, for a player to shake off the hesitation and feel like himself again. And don't underestimate his motivation. Think about it, if Koonce had stayed healthy last year, there's a good chance he would have set himself up for a major contract. Instead, the injury forced him into a 1-year prove-it deal. That's fuel for any competitor. If he can flash the form we've seen in the past, he could earn himself a big payday this offseason, and hopefully that future stays in silver and black. Now, while everyone is buzzing about Terrell Wilson and his potential, it's worth asking, how much of what we're seeing is context? Wilson has lined up a lot against guards, which can make life easier for a pass rusher. Meanwhile, Koonce often draws tougher matchups, sometimes even squaring off with Colton Miller, the Raiders' best offensive lineman. Those details matter when evaluating performance, and they remind us not to judge too quickly. At the end of the day, both players bring upside. The question is, who will turn preseason flashes into regular season production? Matchups matter a lot. Who you line up against can completely change how a player looks. With Tyree Wilson, yes, he's faced some backups, but the flashes are still there. Against San Francisco, he beat the left guard cleanly. On another snap, he held his ground against a tight end and set the edge. Those are the kinds of glimpses that make people believe he might be more than just hype. Sure, maybe those two-sack practice highlights came against guys like Alex Kappa or Dylan Parham, but maybe, just maybe, it's also because Wilson is turning into a real difference maker. If he develops the way the Raiders hope, imagine the possibilities. Max Crosby and Malcolm Koonce crashing from the outside, Wilson and Adam Butler attacking inside. That's the kind of front four that can ruin a game plan before it even starts. But let's shift gears for a moment, because there's another storyline coming out of camp that's turning heads. Safety Terrell Edmunds, a guy who joined the Raiders barely 2 weeks ago, is suddenly getting first-team snaps. In fact, during today's practice, he was the starting free safety alongside Jeremy Chinn. Now, it's still a rotation. Isaiah Pola-Mao and others are getting their chances, but Edmunds stepping in this quickly is telling. It shows the coaching staff wants to see how he fits with the starters, how he communicates, and whether he can handle a bigger role. With preseason rotations ahead, they need to know exactly who can step in if Chinn or another starter rests. From the outside, it looks like the Raiders are sorting through their depth chart carefully, testing different combinations to see who sticks. One thing's clear, Edmunds didn't come here to just be a camp body. The fact that he's already taking starter reps means he's got a real shot to carve out a role. If both Jeremy Chinn and Isaiah Pola-Mao end up sitting, the question becomes, who's next in line for the Raiders at safety? That's where Terrell Edmunds comes in. He's been lining up alongside Chinn in practice, and while I'm not convinced he's locked in as a starter yet, the fact that he's already getting those reps is meaningful. What stood out most when watching Edmunds on tape was how smart he looked on the field. Not just physical, not just effort, football IQ. He read plays quickly, trusted his instincts, and reacted with confidence. That's something you don't always see from new additions this early. It reminded me of what I once said about Jamal Adams. Some players just process the game faster than others. Edmunds isn't at that level, but you can see why the Raiders are testing him with the first team. Could he steal a starting role? Honestly, it's possible. He's a veteran, he's been in multiple defensive systems, and he's already shown he can adjust fast. Compare that to Pola-Mao, who's been on the field for a ton of snaps this preseason, often bouncing between two different roles. That versatility is valuable, but it also means the staff might be spreading him thin, while Edmunds is laser-focused on one position. Bottom line, there's something intriguing about Edmunds. He has experience, he has poise, and the Raiders clearly see potential in him. It's a situation worth keeping an eye on as the preseason winds down. And speaking of new wrinkles, another interesting update came from the cornerback group. Rookie corner Q Blue Kelly was spotted working in the slot at practice. That's a completely new look for the Raiders, and it could hint at how they're experimenting with depth in the secondary. Q Blue Kelly's name is starting to pop up more and more, and now there's a new twist. He's been spotted working in the slot. That's surprising because until now the Raiders had primarily used just two players in that position. Seeing Kelly line up inside for the first time suggests the coaching staff might be rethinking their nickel strategy. Normally, the Raiders have leaned on the big nickel look, using an extra safety for size and run support. It makes sense on paper, but it also has its drawbacks. You lose some coverage ability compared to having three corners on the field. On the other hand, a traditional nickel package with three corners gives you better coverage against the pass, but leaves you a bit softer against the run. It's always a trade-off. That's why Kelly being tested inside is so intriguing. He's got length, he's got size, and if he can handle the slot, it gives the defense more flexibility. Remember, this is a rookie who's only been with the Raiders for a few weeks, yet he's already pushing his way into real competition. He's battling Darian Porter for an outside corner spot, but if he shows he can handle both inside and outside duties, that versatility could make him too valuable to ignore. The Raiders clearly want bigger defensive backs, guys in that 6'1", 6'2" range who can still cover. Kelly develops quickly. He might become that perfect in-between player, strong enough to handle the slot against the run, but skilled enough to cover receivers in space. For someone this new to the team, that's an impressive rise. As the season gets closer, one of the things to watch will be how the Raiders balance their defensive looks. Do they lean more on the big nickel? Do they trust the traditional nickel package? Or do they mix in heavier base and dime formations? Those decisions will shape how this defense functions week to week. And remember, playing in the slot is nothing like playing outside. In a zone-heavy system like the Raiders are running, the nickel corner has one of the toughest jobs on the field. You're part corner, part linebacker. One snap you're dropping into coverage against a quick slot receiver, and the very next you might be stepping into the run fit, squaring up against a tight end, or even colliding with a fullback. Size helps in those moments, but it also comes with challenges. In man coverage, for example, the slot defender has no sideline to use as an extra teammate. A receiver inside has the freedom to cut any direction, inside, outside, vertical, and you have to be ready for all of it. On the boundary, at least, the sideline limits the options. Inside, it's wide open. That's why slot duty is often harder than people realize. But shifting gears, there's some big news worth highlighting: Brock Bowers. He was just voted the 24th best player in the NFL, and even more impressive, he landed as the #1 tight end on the players' top 100 list. That's right, this isn't media hype, this is what fellow players believe. It's crazy when you think about it. Every year, top tight ends enter the league with massive expectations. When T.J. Hawkinson was drafted, scouts called him the most complete tight end prospect we'd ever seen. Kyle Pitts went 4th overall, with people calling him unguardable, almost like a wide receiver trapped in a tight end's body. Michael Mayer had his own hype coming out of Notre Dame, being billed as the next big thing. And now, Brock Bowers has already climbed above all of them, at least in the eyes of his peers. That's wild. When you think about the tight ends who've come into the league over the last decade, most of them were solid, but not game changers. None of them felt like the Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase of their position. That's why, when the Raiders drafted Brock Bowers, I was skeptical. I thought, here we go again, another good tight end. But is he really going to move the needle? Especially when we just spent a pick on Michael Mayer? But the truth is, Brock Bowers is different, and I don't say that lightly. I've watched hours of his film, rookie season included, and it jumps off the screen. The speed, the toughness, the way he turns routine catches into explosive plays. It's just rare. And clearly, I'm not the only one who sees it. He's already being recognized as the best tight end in football, not just by fans or analysts, but by his peers, the players who line up against him. Even NFL executives have him ranked at the top. That's almost unheard of for a rookie. If the Raiders can find consistency at quarterback, Bowers has the potential to rewrite the history books. We're talking about a guy who could end up breaking records, earning a gold jacket, and one day walking straight into the Hall of Fame. But more than that, the hope is he can help bring something this franchise has been missing for far too long: playoff wins, maybe even Super Bowls. Think about that for a second. The Raiders haven't had much to celebrate over the last dozen years. But with Bowers, there's a real chance we're about to enter a brand new era. A player like this doesn't come around often. He's not just good, he's special. And the wildest part? He's only a rookie. 99% of players don't earn the title of best in the league after year one. Brock Bowers just did. You almost never see a rookie instantly crowned the very best at his position. Maybe the closest thing was when Myles Garrett came into the league, but even then, it wasn't this fast. That's why Brock Bowers getting that recognition so early is just incredible. Big shout out to him. I can't wait to see what he does this season. Now let's shift gears and talk about another name, Jadeveon Clowney. His career has been one of the most fascinating storylines in football. Coming out as the #1 overall pick years ago, expectations were sky high. People thought he'd be the next unstoppable force, but for a long time, he never fully lived up to that hype. He was good, but not the dominant game changer everyone imagined. But here's the thing, over the last couple of seasons, something has clicked. Clowney has quietly become one of the more reliable edge defenders in the league. No, he's not the absolute best, but when he was with the Ravens, he looked like a top 10 pass rusher at times. The power, the hand usage, the way he disrupted plays, it was elite. Now he's back on the market, talking with teams and looking to sign before the season starts. The question is, should the Raiders consider bringing him in? At this point in his career, he's no longer just about potential. He's a proven veteran who knows how to win battles up front. Adding that kind of experience and versatility to the defensive line could be huge. It's always been a little puzzling why Jadeveon Clowney never landed that massive 4-year, $100 million type of deal that people once thought he would. The talent was there, no question, but maybe it was the mental side, like struggling to fully grasp complex schemes, or maybe teams just didn't see the long-term commitment they wanted. That might explain why the Ravens, for example, decided not to keep him after just one season. Now here's the real question. Should the Raiders take a chance on him? A lot of people are already talking about Malcolm Koonce stepping up and even suggesting Tyree Wilson should move inside to defensive tackle full-time. That's why bringing in Clowney is such an interesting debate. On one hand, if he's locked in, he could bring real power and experience to the edge. But on the other hand, the timing is strange. Waiting until right before the season to sign with a team doesn't exactly scream all in. Compare that to guys like Max Crosby, who live and breathe football, who show up before sunrise every day. That's the difference between good players and great ones. If it were up to me, I'd hesitate. Clowney has the talent, no doubt, but does he have the same hunger? That's the part that makes me think twice. For the Raiders, it comes down to this. Do you bet on the proven veteran with questions about motivation, or do you trust the younger guys who are already showing flashes of promise? Either way, it's a decision that could shape the defense in a big way this season.